Tonight we are stepping into the bloodiest years of the Triwizard tournament, a tradition so celebrated that entire generations of witches and wizards dreamed of competing in it, and so dangerous that the wizarding world eventually abandoned it for centuries. As you settle in, perhaps beneath a blanket while the day slowly fades behind you, I invite you to leave a small note about how long you have been joining these journeys. If this is your first evening with us, simply say Night 1. If you have returned many times before, tell us how far the road has carried you. Now let the noise of the modern world drift away and listen to the wind crossing the waters of the black lake where torchlight trembles on dark waves and the shadows of Hogwarts stretch across the shore. The lake is calm tonight. Giant squid tentacles move somewhere beneath the surface. The castle windows glow with golden light. Yet long before Harry Potter stood on these grounds in 1994, students from across Europe arrived at schools like Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, carrying hopes that could transform their lives forever. The Triwizard tournament was never merely a sporting event. It was prestige made visible. It was the chance for a single student to become the living symbol of an entire magical institution. And hidden beneath the celebrations, beneath the music and feasts and cheering crowds, there was another truth. The tournament had a habit of burying its champions. Why was a competition supposedly created for friendship responsible for so much suffering? The official history begins in the late 13th century. According to Albus Dumbledore's explanation in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the Triwizard tournament was established as a means of creating ties between the three largest European wizarding schools. Hogwarts represented Britain. Beauxbatons Academy represented France. Durmstrang Institute drew students from northern and eastern regions of Europe. Every 5 years, one school hosted the event. One champion from each school would be selected. The champions would compete in a series of magical tasks designed to test courage, intelligence, and skill. On parchment, it sounds almost noble. 3 schools meeting peacefully, students proving themselves through excellence. Yet even the earliest surviving descriptions contain an uncomfortable detail. Nobody speaks about the tournament without also mentioning its dangers. The magical world of the Middle Ages was not the magical world Harry inherited. Wizards carried fewer restrictions. Magical creatures lived in closer proximity to wizard settlements. Regulation existed, but not with the same intensity later enforced by the Ministry of Magic. During these centuries, dragons were not distant curiosities discussed in textbooks by authors like Newt Scamander. They were real threats encountered across parts of Europe. Magical travel remained slower. Communication was less reliable. In such an environment, risk often carried a different meaning. A dangerous challenge was not automatically viewed as unacceptable. Instead, danger itself became proof that a contest mattered. The founders of the tournament seem to have understood this instinct well. If a champion could overcome obstacles that ordinary students could not face, the champion's victory would possess enormous value. The champion became more than a student. They became a representative of magical excellence. The crowds who gathered to watch were not merely spectators. They were witnesses. Their memories carried stories back to distant wizarding communities, Long before wizarding newspapers achieved broad circulation, reputation traveled through stories. The winner of a Triwizard tournament could become famous far beyond the walls of their school. There is something else worth noticing. The three participating schools were not equals in every respect. Hogwarts sat in Scotland, hidden behind enchantments and ancient magic. Beauxbatons occupied the Pyrenees Mountains and enjoyed a reputation for refinement and elegance. Durmstrang carried an aura of severity, teaching students in a harsher northern climate and maintaining a complicated historical association with the study of certain darker branches of magic. The tournament brought together institutions that viewed themselves as rivals. Officially, they celebrated unity. Unofficially, they competed for prestige. That tension existed from the beginning. Imagine arriving as a young champion during one of those early tournaments. Your name has been selected. Hundreds of students know who you are. Professors speak of your potential. Family members write letters filled with pride. Every corridor becomes quieter when you walk through it. Every conversation seems connected to the tasks ahead, and success promises admiration, failure promises humiliation. The pressure alone would have been immense, even before considering the dangers waiting inside the competition itself. Why then did generations of students continue volunteering? Part of the answer lies inside the culture of the wizarding world. Throughout magical history, extraordinary witches and wizards earned respect by demonstrating mastery. Merlin's reputation survived for centuries. Famous duelists entered historical records. Great inventors, potion makers, and explorers became legends. Achievement mattered deeply. A young witch or wizard living in the shadow of such stories naturally dreamed of joining them. The Triwizard Tournament offered a direct path toward that dream. For a brief period, an ordinary student could stand at the center of the magical world. The rewards were not merely symbolic. By Harry Potter's era, the winning champion received 1,000 galleons. Although we do not know the exact rewards offered in medieval tournaments, prestige itself functioned as a form of currency. Doors opened more easily for famous people. Influential witches and wizards paid attention to them. Opportunities followed them. A victory could shape an entire future. That possibility helped explain why contestants accepted risks that seem shocking from a modern perspective. Yet the mystery remains. If the goal was friendship, why structure the event around extreme danger rather than cooperation? A popular interpretation among historians of the wizarding world focuses on the period in which the tournament was born. Medieval Europe valued displays of bravery. Knights entered jousts. Warriors sought honor through difficult trials. The magical community did not exist separately from those cultural influences. Wizards possessed their own traditions, but they lived alongside broader European society. The Triwizard Tournament may have reflected that mindset. Friendship was the official objective, yet friendship achieved through shared hardship. Rival schools would respect one another after witnessing extraordinary courage. At least that appears to have been the theory. The reality proved messier. Competition has a way of transforming noble ideas. Once schools began comparing victories, prestige became intertwined with identity. Every tournament produced a winner and two losers. Every generation accumulated stories about which institution was strongest. Pride intensified. rivalries deepened. Students who had never visited another school learned to see those distant schools as opponents. The very structure designed to unite Europe sometimes encouraged division instead. As the centuries passed, another pattern emerged. The dangers were not decreasing. They were becoming part of the tournament's identity. People remembered remarkable victories. They remembered impossible escapes. They remembered champions who succeeded against overwhelming odds. And when a tradition begins celebrating survival itself, the line between competition and sacrifice starts to blur. Standing beside the Black Lake, watching torchlight dance across the water, it becomes difficult to ignore the question that haunted the tournament from its earliest years. If everyone knew how dangerous it was, why did nobody stop it before blood began staining its history? Why did Wizarding Society continue celebrating the tournament after champions began dying? The uncomfortable answer is that the deaths were never treated as evidence that the tournament had failed. For many centuries, they were treated as evidence that the tournament mattered. By the time the Triwizard tournament had become one of the most famous traditions in Europe, generations of witches and wizards had grown up hearing stories about impossible tasks and legendary champions. The danger was woven into the event's reputation. Albus Dumbledore later explained that the competition had accumulated a death toll so severe that it was eventually discontinued, but that statement raises its own mystery. If fatalities occurred often enough to force cancellation, the wizarding world must have accepted those losses for an astonishingly long time before finally deciding enough was enough. The surviving historical details are frustratingly sparse. Rowling deliberately left much of the tournament's medieval history unexplored, creating one of those intriguing gaps that make the wizarding world feel older than the stories themselves. We know the tournament was held every 5 years. We know it continued for centuries. We know champions died. What we do not know is the exact number. No magical history textbook ever gives Harry a precise figure. No ministry archive quoted in the novels provides a final count. That silence is striking. In a world where Hogwarts records Quidditch results stretching back generations, the absence of detailed casualty records feels almost deliberate. One explanation lies in how wizarding communities preserve memory. Magical history often focuses on extraordinary individuals rather than statistics. Students learn about Merlin, about the founders of Hogwarts, about famous goblin rebellions, about the International Statute of Secrecy enacted in 1692. The stories survive. The numbers fade. A champion killed during a tournament might remain famous within their own generation, yet gradually disappear from wider memory as decades pass. Eventually, only the legend of the tournament remains. The people who paid the price become shadows behind the tradition. The atmosphere surrounding those early tournaments must have been unlike anything seen during Harry's era. In 1994, safety precautions surrounded the champions. Madame Pomfrey stood ready to provide medical treatment. Ministry officials supervised events. Dragon handlers accompanied the nesting mothers brought from Romania. Even with those precautions, disaster nearly struck repeatedly. Harry narrowly escaped the Hungarian horntail. Fleur Delacour was attacked by Grindylows beneath the Black Lake. Victor Crumb emerged from the maze under the Imperious Curse. If such dangers existed during a supposedly safer modern revival, the older tournaments must have felt far more unpredictable. Consider the magical knowledge available centuries earlier. Healers existed, certainly. St. Mungo's Hospital would eventually become one of the greatest medical institutions in the wizarding world. Yet magical medicine was not limitless. Even in Harry's lifetime, some injuries resisted easy treatment. George Weasley permanently lost an ear after being struck by Severus Snape's Sectum Sempra curse during the Battle of the Seven Potters. Alastor Moody lost an eye and a leg during his career. Bill Weasley carried scars from Fenrir Greyback. Despite receiving immediate magical care, wizards could mend broken bones and heal cuts, but they were never invincible. A champion facing a lethal creature centuries ago understood that survival was not guaranteed. Why were magical creatures chosen so often as tournament obstacles? The answer becomes clearer when we examine how magical creatures function throughout wizarding culture. From the moment first-year students arrive at Hogwarts, they encounter beasts that inspire awe. Hippogriffs require proper respect. Acromantulas command entire colonies in the Forbidden Forest. Thestrals remain invisible to those who have never witnessed death. Dragons occupy a special place among all of them. They are ancient, powerful, difficult to control, and extraordinarily dangerous. To overcome such a creature is to prove mastery not merely over magic, but over fear itself. When Harry faced the Hungarian Horntail during the first task in November 1994, spectators watched from specially prepared stands while Charlie Weasley's dragon handlers remained nearby. The challenge was simple in theory: retrieve a golden egg. The reality was far more terrifying. The Horntail possessed long black scales, bronze horns, and a tail covered with deadly spikes. Harry summoned his firebolt using Accio and spent much of the task flying through the Hogwarts grounds while a dragon pursued him. The audience cheered because the danger was real. If the dragon had caught him, nobody doubted what would happen. That same principle likely governed earlier tournaments. The organizers were not seeking controlled classroom exercises. They wanted spectacles that demonstrated exceptional ability. Albus Dumbledore later mentions manticores and cockatrices when discussing the tournament's history. Both creatures carried horrifying reputations. A manticore possessed the body of a lion, the head of a human, and a venomous tail. According to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, it was among the most dangerous magical creatures known. A cockatrice, meanwhile, was capable of killing with frightening efficiency. Simply introducing such beasts into a competition reveals how organizers thought about risk. There is another detail hidden beneath the surface. Magical creatures are unpredictable. A wizard can rehearse a spell. A potion can be measured carefully. A dragon follows its own instincts. The moment a creature enters a task, control begins slipping away from the organizers. During Harry's first task, the Hungarian Horntail broke free from its chains. The dragon was supposed to remain near its nest. Instead, it tore across the grounds after him. The event remained exciting precisely because something unexpected happened. Earlier generations almost certainly witnessed similar moments, except without the same level of oversight. Why did the crowds keep watching? Because fear and admiration often occupy the same space. The audience observing Harry's dragon task experienced both simultaneously. They wanted him to succeed. They were terrified he might fail. The emotional power came from uncertainty. Every historical tournament likely produced similar scenes. Families watching from temporary stands, students cheering until their voices disappeared, professors trying to maintain composure while calculating worst-case outcomes. The danger transformed ordinary spectators into witnesses of something unforgettable. One popular fan theory suggests that the tournament's reputation became self-reinforcing over time. Each generation inherited stories from the previous one. Those stories emphasized dramatic escapes and heroic victories. As a result, the tournament's risks became romanticized. Young witches and wizards grew up hearing tales of greatness rather than cautionary warnings. The deaths remained part of the narrative, but they became distant, almost mythical. Human beings often underestimate dangers that belong to the past. Wizards appear no different. Yet there is a difference between hearing about danger and standing before it. Somewhere in the forgotten centuries between the tournament's creation and its cancellation, champions undoubtedly discovered that difference firsthand. They stepped into arenas built by teachers and ministry officials. They faced creatures that did not care about school pride or tradition. They learned that prestige offered no protection. And as the years continued passing, the number of graves connected to the tournament slowly increased until even the wizarding world could no longer ignore what was happening. Why would educators deliberately place teenagers in front of creatures capable of killing trained adult wizards? It is a question that becomes harder to answer the longer you sit with it. Hogwarts professors, Beauxbatons instructors, and Durmstrang masters were not reckless fools. They were accomplished witches and wizards, entrusted with educating the most talented students in Europe. Yet the historical record leaves little room for doubt. Dangerous magical creatures were not occasional additions to the Triwizard tournament. They were woven into its very structure. Albus Dumbledore's references to manticores and cockatrices reveal that organizers repeatedly selected beasts whose reputations alone inspired fear throughout the wizarding world. The danger was not hidden, it was advertised. To understand this mindset, it helps to remember how differently magical society viewed powerful creatures. Consider the dragon reserves visited by Charlie Weasley in Romania. Dragons were dangerous enough to require specialists, yet they were also respected. Wizards studied them, trained them to the extent possible, transported them across countries when necessary. The Ministry of Magic classified dragons among the most dangerous magical species, but that classification did not mean avoiding them entirely. Instead, danger often increased a creature's prestige. The more formidable the beast, the greater the accomplishment in overcoming it. The 1994 tournament offers a useful window into this philosophy. 4 dragon breeds were selected for the first task. Fleur Delacour faced the common Welsh green. Cedric Diggory confronted the Swedish short snout. Victor Krum drew the Chinese fireball. Harry Potter received the Hungarian horntail. Widely considered the most dangerous of the 4, each champion's objective was identical: retrieve a golden egg guarded by a nesting dragon. The task was not designed to eliminate the creature. It was designed to test ingenuity under pressure. Yet everyone involved understood that one mistake could end in catastrophe. The reactions of the champions revealed just how serious the challenge was. Harry lost sleep after learning what awaited him. Cedric Diggory emerged from his encounter with burns on his face and shoulder. Victor Crumb's conjunctivitis curse partially blinded his dragon, causing it to trample its own eggs. Fleur Delacour successfully bewitched her dragon into a brief sleep, only for the creature to awaken unexpectedly. These were some of the most gifted students in Europe. Even they struggled. Their experiences hint at what earlier champions must have endured when facing equally dangerous tasks with fewer safeguards. The mention of manticores opens an even darker possibility. According to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, a manticore possesses highly dangerous venom and is notoriously difficult to subdue. The creature's hide repels many charms. Its reputation is so fearsome that even experienced witches and wizards approach it with caution. If manticores truly appeared in historical tournaments, as Dumbledore suggests, organizers knowingly placed students before creatures that professional magizoologists would hesitate to confront. The implication is astonishing. These were not symbolic challenges. They were genuine tests of survival. Then there are cockatrices. Unlike dragons, which at least occupy a familiar place in wizarding imagination, cockatrices carry a stranger and more unsettling aura. Magical texts describe them as deadly hybrids associated with lethal magical effects. Dumbledore specifically cites a cockatrice while discussing one infamous tournament in 1792. The fact that a single creature could leave such a lasting mark on tournament history tells us something important. Certain tasks became legendary, not because they succeeded, but because they went horribly wrong. Why did organizers keep choosing creatures rather than relying on spells, puzzles, or magical duels? Part of the answer lies in visibility. A dragon can be seen from hundreds of feet away. A giant magical beast creates immediate drama for spectators. The audience watching Harry's first task understood exactly what was happening. They could see danger taking shape before them. A complicated magical puzzle might challenge a champion's intellect, but it would be difficult for a crowd to follow. A dragon charging across an arena requires no explanation. The creature itself becomes the story. There's also a deeper tradition at work. Throughout wizarding history, mastery over magical creatures often symbolized mastery over oneself. Newt Scamander's life demonstrates this idea beautifully. He succeeds not because he dominates creatures through force, but because he understands them. Hagrid earns the trust of beings many others fear. Even Harry's encounter with Buckbeak in 1993 depends upon respect rather than aggression. The magical world repeatedly rewards those who approach powerful creatures with wisdom. Tournament organizers may have believed such encounters revealed a champion's true character. Yet creatures do not always behave according to human expectations. The Hungarian Horntail did not care that hundreds of spectators were watching. Grindylows attacking Fleur beneath the Black Lake did not care about tournament rules. Magical beasts possess their own instincts, and instincts cannot be negotiated with once events spiral beyond control. This unpredictability gave the tournament much of its excitement. It also made accidents inevitable. Every task involving living creatures introduced variables that no organizer could completely eliminate. The Black Lake itself, offers a fascinating example. During the second task of 1995, champions entered cold, dark water filled with merpeople, grindylows, and other aquatic life. Harry used gillyweed supplied through Dobby's intervention. Cedric Diggory employed transfiguration. Victor Crumb partially transformed himself into a shark. Fleur struggled after encountering grindylows. The task appeared safer than the dragon challenge, yet danger remained everywhere. Beneath the surface, visibility disappeared. Distances became uncertain. Panic could prove as dangerous as any creature. When you step back and examine these events together, a pattern emerges. Tournament organizers consistently favored situations where control was incomplete. Champions entered environments that resisted planning: forests, lakes, creature enclosures, mazes. Each location introduced uncertainty. The audience saw courage, the organizers saw a test. The champions experienced something closer to confrontation with the unknown. Why did nobody conclude that the unknown was simply too dangerous? Because for centuries the tournament continued producing stories people loved to tell. Victories overshadowed tragedies. Survivors returned home carrying glory. Schools celebrated their champions. New students listened to those stories and imagined themselves achieving similar greatness. Tradition gathered strength with every passing generation. By the time doubts became impossible to ignore, the tournament had become one of the oldest institutions in European magical culture. Ending it would require admitting something uncomfortable: that the pursuit of greatness had demanded a higher price than anyone wished to acknowledge. And soon, one particular tournament would demonstrate that truth more clearly than any dragon ever could. Long before Harry Potter's name emerged from the Goblet of Fire, another event had already shaken the wizarding world. It occurred in the year 1792. It involved a cockatrice, and it left all three heads of the participating schools injured in a disaster so notorious that its memory survived for more than 2 centuries. How did a contest severe enough to injure the heads of all three schools fail to end the Triwizard tournament forever? The year was 1792. By then, the Triwizard tournament had already existed for roughly 5 centuries. Entire generations of champions had come and gone. Magical governments had evolved. The International Statute of Secrecy had been enacted in 1692, fundamentally changing how witches and wizards interacted with the non-magical world. Yet despite all those transformations, the tournament remained remarkably familiar. Champions still faced dangerous tasks. Schools still competed for prestige. Crowds still gathered to witness extraordinary feats. Then came the incident that would become one of the most infamous moments in the competition's history. The surviving canon detail is deceptively brief. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore explains that the 1792 tournament involved a cockatrice. During the event, the creature went on a rampage and injured the heads of all 3 participating schools. That single sentence raises a remarkable number of questions. The headmasters and headmistresses of Hogwarts, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, were among the most accomplished magical practitioners in Europe. These were not inexperienced students. These were leaders trusted with entire institutions. If all 3 were injured during the same incident, the situation must have deteriorated with extraordinary speed. The image itself is startling. Imagine a tournament arena filled with spectators, champions preparing for a task, professors observing from the sidelines. Then something breaks. Perhaps containment charms fail. Perhaps the creature reacts unpredictably. Whatever happened, the result is chaos. A cockatrice is not merely a nuisance. It is a magical beast capable of causing catastrophic harm. The fact that the school heads became casualties suggests they were forced to intervene directly, likely placing themselves between the creature and students or spectators. What makes the event so fascinating is how little else survives in the historical record. We do not know the names of the champions involved. We do not know which school was hosting. We do not know whether any students were injured or killed. Rowling leaves those details unstated. Yet sometimes silence tells its own story. The fact that wizarding history remembers the injuries to the school heads rather than the winner of the tournament reveals what people considered important about that year. Victory vanished from memory. Disaster remained. The incident also exposes a weakness in the tournament's design. Organizers repeatedly relied upon dangerous creatures while assuming they could maintain control. Most of the time, they probably succeeded. Successful tournaments rarely become legendary. Failure does. The 1792 disaster survives because it shattered the illusion that experienced adults could always manage the risks they created. One moment of chaos was enough to place even the most powerful figures present in danger. Why was the cockatrice there in the first place? That question takes us back to the tournament's original philosophy. Every generation sought challenges impressive enough to eclipse the previous one. Dragons inspired awe, manticores inspired fear, cockatrices inspired both. The logic seems straightforward. If champions are meant to prove exceptional courage, then the obstacles must be extraordinary. Yet this reasoning contains a trap. Once spectacle becomes the goal, pressure emerges to create increasingly memorable tasks. Over centuries, that pressure can push organizers toward greater and greater risks. There is an interesting parallel inside wizarding sports. Quidditch itself contains elements that modern muggles would consider astonishingly dangerous. Players fly hundreds of feet above the ground. Bludgers attempt to knock them from their brooms. Serious injuries occur regularly. Harry experiences broken bones. Oliver Wood frequently discusses the possibility of players being hurt. Yet Quidditch survives because the wizarding world accepts a certain level of risk in exchange for excitement and tradition. The Triwizard tournament appears to have operated according to the same cultural assumptions, only amplified dramatically. The difference, of course, is scale. A Quidditch match rarely threatens dozens of lives simultaneously. A magical creature loose inside a tournament arena is another matter entirely. Once a beast escapes control, everyone nearby becomes vulnerable. The 1792 disaster may have forced the wizarding world to confront that distinction more clearly than ever before. For perhaps the first time, the dangers were not confined to champions who had volunteered. The danger spread outward toward organizers themselves. Some historians of magical culture have suggested that the incident marked a turning point in attitudes toward tournament safety. Not an immediate turning point. The competition continued afterward, but the event planted doubts. When a tradition begins injuring the very people responsible for overseeing it, confidence inevitably weakens. Teachers become more cautious, Ministry officials ask more questions, parents become less enthusiastic, the prestige remains, but the certainty begins to crack. Why didn't the tournament disappear immediately after 1792? Because traditions rarely collapse in a single moment. Even disastrous events often become stories of resilience rather than warnings. Wizarding society had invested centuries of pride in the tournament. Schools viewed participation as an honor. Former champions occupied respected positions throughout magical communities. Too many people believed in the institution to abandon it overnight. Instead, the competition continued forward, carrying a growing burden of unease. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout wizarding history. Consider Azkaban. Long after the prison's horrors became widely known, it remained operational. Consider the ministry's use of dementors. Officials tolerated dangers and moral compromises because those systems already existed. The magical world, like the non-magical one, often changes slowly. People adapt to risks they would never choose if asked to design a system from the beginning. The Triwizard tournament benefited from that same inertia. Yet the aftermath of 1792 left a lingering question that nobody could fully answer. If a cockatrice could injure 3 school heads in a single incident, what might happen during the next disaster? Every tournament afterward carried that shadow. Every organizer knew the precedent existed. Every champion stepped into a tradition that had already demonstrated its capacity for chaos. The competition survived, but its reputation changed. It was no longer merely dangerous, it was historically dangerous. And as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the list of concerns continued growing. Accidents accumulated. Fatalities remained part of the tournament's legacy. Ministries became more involved in education and public safety. The magical world itself was changing. Slowly, almost reluctantly, people began asking whether prestige alone justified the cost. Before long, the question could no longer be avoided. The bloodiest years of the tournament were not defined by a single catastrophe. They were defined by the realization that catastrophes kept happening. Exactly how many champions died during the Triwizard tournament? And why does wizarding history seem strangely reluctant to tell us? Albus Dumbledore provides one of the most important clues on the opening night of the 1994 to 1995 school year. Standing in the Great Hall beneath the enchanted ceiling, surrounded by floating candles and the banners of Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, he explains that the Triwizard tournament had not been held for more than a century. Then he gives the reason. The competition, he says, was discontinued because the death toll had become too high. It is one of the most chilling statements in the entire series, precisely because of its brevity. Dumbledore does not dramatize it. He does not elaborate. He simply states it as fact, and the hall falls silent. Notice what that statement implies. The tournament was not canceled after a single tragedy. It was not suspended because of one disastrous year. A death toll is something accumulated. It grows gradually. One fatality becomes several. Several become enough to establish a pattern. By the time officials decided to discontinue the event, they were responding not to an isolated incident, but to a long history. The bloodiest years of the tournament were therefore not confined to one generation. They stretched across centuries. The absence of exact numbers has fascinated readers for decades. Rowling never reveals how many champions died. No ministry report appears in the books. No surviving historical document gives a final count, yet the omission feels realistic. Historical records, in both magical and non-magical societies, often become incomplete over long periods. Names disappear. Archives are lost. Details fade. What remains is the broader conclusion. Enough students died that the most prestigious competition in Europe eventually became indefensible. By the 19th century, the magical world was changing in ways that made the tournament increasingly difficult to justify. The Ministry of Magic had become a more sophisticated institution than its medieval predecessors. Departments such as the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures expanded oversight of dangerous species. Educational standards became more formalized. International cooperation developed through organizations like the International Confederation of Wizards. A competition designed in the late 13th century now existed inside a society with very different expectations. Traditions that once seemed acceptable began attracting scrutiny. There is an irony here. The wizarding world often prides itself on preserving the past. Hogwarts itself is a castle over 1,000 years old. Students still use parchment and quills. Ancient magical objects remain central to daily life. Yet the cancellation of the Triwizard tournament demonstrates that even magical societies eventually reach limits. Some traditions survive because they continue serving a useful purpose. Others survive because nobody has challenged them. Once enough people began questioning the tournament, its weaknesses became impossible to ignore. Why did it take so long for those questions to gain momentum? Part of the answer lies in prestige. Prestige has a remarkable ability to obscure costs. Every successful tournament produced celebrated champions. Schools proudly displayed victories. Students dreamed about competing. The survivors became living advertisements for the event. Human memory often favors triumph over tragedy. A champion returning home with glory creates a powerful story. A champion buried after a failed task creates a painful one. Communities naturally prefer the first narrative. Over time, those preferences shape collective memory. Another factor was rarity. The tournament occurred every 5 years. That interval matters. If a tragedy happened during one competition, an entire half-decade passed before the next. New students arrived, graduates left, emotional wounds softened. The distance between events made it easier for people to treat each disaster as exceptional rather than systemic. 5 years is long enough for optimism to return. Organizers could promise reforms. Schools could convince themselves that lessons had been learned. Then the cycle began again. The cancellation itself marked a remarkable moment. Somewhere within the ministry and the participating schools, influential figures finally concluded that the risks outweighed the benefits. We do not know the exact meeting. We do not know who argued most forcefully for ending the tradition. But the decision required overcoming centuries of inertia. It required respected witches and wizards to acknowledge that the tournament's reputation could not justify continued fatalities. That admission may have been one of the most difficult choices in the history of magical education. For more than 100 years afterward, the tournament disappeared. Students attended Hogwarts without expecting champions to be selected. Beauxbaton and Durmstrang continued educating generations of witches and wizards without preparing them for Triwizard competition. The tradition did not merely pause, it became history. The gap stretched so long that by Harry Potter's first year in 1991, nobody expected its return. The tournament belonged to books and old stories. Its dangerous age appeared finished. And yet there is something fascinating about how quickly enthusiasm returned once revival became possible. In 1994, when Dumbledore announces the tournament's return, excitement spreads through Hogwarts almost immediately. Fred and George Weasley immediately begin discussing ways to bypass the age restriction. Students speculate about becoming champions. The old prestige reawakens with startling speed. More than a century of cancellation had not erased the tournament's allure. If anything, absence had made it more legendary. Why were people so eager to revive something that had once become synonymous with death? The official explanation centered on international cooperation. The magical world of the 1990s sought stronger ties between schools. Hogwarts would welcome delegations from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. Students would meet peers from different countries. Cultural exchange would accompany competition. These goals echoed the tournament's original purpose centuries earlier. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. The event would return, but this time under modern supervision. This time, organizers promised things would be different. The details seemed reassuring. An age line created by Dumbledore would prevent underage students from entering. The Goblet of Fire would select champions from qualified candidates. Ministry officials would oversee preparations. Dragon handlers, magical creatures, experts, and professional judges would participate. Every precaution suggested that organizers had learned from history. Looking back, it is easy to see why so many people felt confident. They believed they had inherited the tournament while leaving its bloodiest years behind. The tragedy, of course, is that history has a habit of returning when people become convinced they have mastered it. Long before Harry entered the maze, long before the graveyard in Little Hangleton, long before Cedric Diggory's final words echoed across the grounds of Hogwarts, the revived tournament was already carrying the weight of every forgotten champion who had come before. The organizers thought they were reopening a celebrated tradition. In reality, they were reopening an old wound that had never fully healed. What happened to the champions whose names vanished from history, despite competing in the most famous magical contest in Europe? When Harry Potter's name emerged unexpectedly from the Goblet of Fire on the evening of October 31st, 1994, the entire Great Hall reacted at once. Hundreds of students witnessed the moment. Professors stared in disbelief. Igor Karkaroff immediately protested. Madame Maxime demanded answers. Within hours, every student at Hogwarts knew exactly who the champions were. Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons, Victor Krum for Durmstrang, and impossibly Harry Potter as a fourth champion. Their names became part of history almost instantly. Yet if you ask a student in Harry's era to name a champion from 2 centuries earlier, silence is likely the only answer. Chiu, that contrast is remarkable. The Triwizard tournament existed for roughly 500 years before its cancellation. Held every 5 years, it must have produced dozens upon dozens of champions. Some won glorious victories. Some likely suffered serious injuries. Some never returned home at all. Yet the overwhelming majority have disappeared from the historical record. Their schools survive. The tournament survives in memory. The individuals themselves have faded away. It is one of the quietest tragedies hidden within wizarding history. The loss becomes even more striking when compared with Quidditch. Hogwarts students can recite famous Quidditch teams. They know about the Chudley Cannons, the Holyhead Harpies, and Puddlemere United. Historical players remain celebrated long after retirement. Yet Triwizard champions, whose achievements were arguably even more extraordinary, are largely forgotten. The imbalance suggests that survival of historical memory often depends less on accomplishment and more on circumstance. A Quidditch player can build a long public career. A Triwizard champion receives only a brief moment in the spotlight. Consider Cedric Diggory. Before 1994, Cedric was already respected at Hogwarts. He was a prefect, a talented seeker for the Hufflepuff Quidditch team, a student known for fairness and quiet confidence. Yet the tournament transformed him into something larger. His photograph appeared in the Daily Prophet. Students across Europe learned his name. The competition elevated him beyond ordinary school life. If that could happen within a single year, imagine the status enjoyed by champions during earlier centuries, when the tournament was one of the wizarding world's most anticipated events. The forgotten champions must once have occupied a similar place. Somewhere, centuries ago, students crowded around notice boards to see who had been selected. Families celebrated, teachers offered congratulations, entire schools invested their hopes in a single young witch or wizard. The emotional reality would have been very familiar. Human nature changes more slowly than institutions. Pride, fear, excitement, and ambition would have accompanied every selection ceremony. The names mattered deeply to the people living through those moments, even if history eventually forgot them. How were champions chosen before the era we know best? The Goblet of Fire itself appears ancient. By 1994, it is already treated with enormous reverence. Dumbledore describes it as an impartial magical judge. Once a name emerges from its blue-white flames, a binding magical contract is created. This is why Harry cannot simply refuse to compete after his name is selected. The precise mechanics of that magical contract are never fully explained, but everyone present accepts its authority. The goblet is not merely ceremonial, it possesses real magical power. Because the tournament existed centuries before Harry's time, the goblet almost certainly selected champions for many generations. Imagine the scene repeating again and again across history. A hall lit by candlelight. Nervous students waiting in silence. A burst of red flame, a scrap of parchment floating through the air. Then a name. In that instant, an ordinary student becomes a champion. The future narrows. Expectations gather around them. Their life changes forever. There is a haunting aspect to this process. The goblet does not merely reward talent, it imposes responsibility. Once chosen, a champion cannot simply return to ordinary studies. Cedric still attends classes, but everyone sees him differently. Fleur becomes the face of Beauxbatons. Victor Krum arrives already famous as the seeker for Bulgaria's national Quidditch team, yet even he becomes defined by his role in the tournament. Selection elevates a person, but it also isolates them. Champions stand slightly apart from everyone else. That isolation may explain why so many forgotten champions feel strangely present despite the absence of names. The details differ across centuries, but the experience remains recognizable. Each champion carries the expectations of an entire institution. Every mistake becomes public. Every success becomes legendary. During the second task, Harry worries constantly about rescuing Ron Weasley from the Black Lake. Cedric studies clues obsessively. Fleur struggles with the pressure of representing Beauxbatons. The emotional burden is visible even in the safest era of the tournament. Earlier generations likely carried the same weight under far more dangerous conditions. Why do the dead champions seem easier to remember than the winners? Because tragedy leaves a deeper mark than victory. The tournament's cancellation ensured that discussions of its history became inseparable from discussions of its casualties. Whenever Dumbledore mentions the event, the death toll appears almost immediately. The competition is remembered not only for excellence, but for loss. That shift changes how people view the past. Instead of asking who won, later generations ask who died. Instead of celebrating champions, they examine the dangers those champions faced. There is a parallel here with the Chamber of Secrets. Most students know the story because of the attacks and the mystery surrounding them. Few discuss ordinary years at Hogwarts with the same intensity. Danger attracts attention. Catastrophe reshapes memory. The Triwizard Tournament experienced the same transformation. Over centuries, the competition's achievements became overshadowed by its risks. The champions faded into the background while the dangers took center stage. A popular fan theory suggests that many historical champions went on to become influential witches and wizards whose connection to the tournament was gradually forgotten. The theory cannot be proven, but it fits the logic of the world. 500 years of competitions must have produced remarkable individuals. Some likely became ministry officials. Some became renowned researchers, healers, or magical explorers. Their later accomplishments may have eclipsed their student triumphs. History sometimes remembers the destination while forgetting the journey. Whatever became of them, one truth remains. Every forgotten champion stepped forward, believing the risk was worthwhile. Every champion looked toward the future rather than toward the long shadow of tournament history. They could not know how their stories would end. They could not know whether their names would survive. They only knew that for a brief moment, the magical world was watching. And after more than a century of silence, the magical world would watch once again. The tournament would return to Hogwarts in 1994 with new safeguards, new organizers, and renewed confidence. Yet beneath the excitement lingered an uncomfortable question. Had anyone truly solved the problems that destroyed the competition, or had they simply convinced themselves that history would behave differently this time? Did the organizers truly believe they had solved the problem of champion deaths, or had the tournament's prestige simply become impossible to resist? On the evening of August 30th, 1994, students arriving at Hogwarts encountered signs that something unusual was happening. The castle had been prepared for distinguished guests. Class schedules would soon be adjusted. Security measures were being discussed behind closed doors. Albus Dumbledore, now headmaster of Hogwarts, had agreed to host the first Triwizard Tournament in more than a century. The decision was not made lightly. It involved cooperation between the Ministry of Magic, Hogwarts Beauxbatons Academy, and Durmstrang Institute. After generations of cancellation, one of the most dangerous traditions in wizarding history was about to return. The figures leading the revival projected confidence. Bartemius Crouch Sr., head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, served as one of the tournament's principal organizers. Few ministry officials possessed a stronger reputation. During the First Wizarding War, Crouch had become famous for his uncompromising stance against dark wizards. Alongside him stood Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, a former beater for the Wimborne Wasps, and a man whose enthusiasm for spectacles sometimes exceeded his attention to detail. Together they represented two sides of the ministry's thinking. Crouch offered authority. Bagman offered excitement. The revival's central argument was simple. The tournament's original purpose remained valuable. Bringing students together from different countries encouraged understanding and cooperation. The magical world of the 1990s was smaller than the non-magical one. International connections mattered. Young witches and wizards rarely interacted with peers from foreign schools. The arrival of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang at Hogwarts would create friendships impossible under normal circumstances. In theory, the tournament could strengthen the entire European magical community. The organizers also emphasized safety. This was the crucial difference between the new tournament and its predecessors. Dumbledore announced an age restriction. No student under 17 could enter. An age line, a powerful enchantment designed by Dumbledore himself, surrounded the Goblet of Fire. Anyone too young attempting to cross the boundary would be repelled. Fred and George Weasley famously tried to circumvent the restriction using an aging potion. The result was immediate. They crossed the line, submitted their names, and were promptly hurled backward, while magnificent white beards erupted from their faces. The lesson was clear. This time, participation would be limited to older students. That restriction reveals a fascinating shift in philosophy. Earlier generations seem to have accepted risk as an unavoidable aspect of the competition. The 1994 organizers accepted the same risks, but attempted to manage them more carefully. They did not eliminate dragons. They did not eliminate dangerous tasks. Instead, they concluded that mature students would be better equipped to face those challenges. Whether that belief was correct remains open to debate. Cedric Diggory was 17. Fleur Delacour was 17. Victor Crumb was 18. Their age did not make them invulnerable. Why were so many people willing to trust the new safeguards? Because the people creating them were exceptionally respected. Dumbledore's reputation alone carried enormous weight. By 1994, he was widely regarded as the greatest wizard of his age. He had defeated Gellert Grindelwald in 1945. He served as chief warlock of the Wizengamot and supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards at various points in his career. When Dumbledore assured the wizarding world that precautions were in place, many people believed him, not blindly but sincerely. If anyone could revive the tournament safely, it seemed likely to be him. The arrival of the visiting schools reinforced that optimism. Beaubaton appeared in a magnificent powder blue carriage drawn by giant winged horses known as Abraxans. Madame Olympe Maxime emerged from the carriage towering above most witches and wizards present. Durmstrang arrived aboard a mysterious enchanted ship that rose dramatically from the depths of the Black Lake. Igor Karkaroff led his students through the great hall beneath floating candles and enchanted stars. The spectacle was breathtaking. Students who had never traveled beyond Britain suddenly found themselves sharing corridors with peers from across Europe. For a while, the revival seemed successful. Friendships formed. Rivalries remained largely good-natured. Students discussed potential champions endlessly. The goblet of fire itself stood in the entrance hall, its blue-white flames dancing inside a wooden cup, older than almost anyone present could comprehend. Each evening, students gathered around it. Names disappeared into the fire. Dreams followed them. The atmosphere resembled a festival more than a dangerous competition. Then Halloween arrived. The champion selection ceremony remains one of the most memorable moments in the entire series. The great hall darkened. The goblet's flames shifted from blue-white to red. First came Victor Krum for Durmstrang, then Fleur Delacour for Beaubaton, then Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts. Everything unfolded exactly as expected. 3 schools, 3 champions, 3 names. The organizers must have felt immense relief. Their careful planning appeared to be working perfectly. Then the goblet produced a 4th name. Harry Potter was 14 years old. He had not entered. He stood far below the age limit. Yet the parchment clearly carried his name. The room's reaction was immediate and chaotic. Students shouted accusations. Professors exchanged alarmed glances. Karkaroff protested furiously. Madame Maxime questioned the fairness of the process. Even Dumbledore appeared deeply troubled. In a single moment, confidence began to fracture. Why is this moment so important to the history of the tournament? Because it revealed how fragile the safeguards truly were. The age line had functioned correctly. The goblet had been protected. Ministry officials had supervised preparations. Yet someone had still manipulated the system. A powerful witch or wizard had managed to deceive an ancient magical artifact that generations trusted as an impartial judge. The revelation carried unsettling implications. If the tournament's most fundamental protection could be bypassed, what else might fail? Most people did not yet understand the truth. They did not know that Bartemius Crouch Jr., presumed dead after his imprisonment in Azkaban, had secretly infiltrated Hogwarts disguised as Alastair Moody through Polyjuice Potion. They did not know he had placed Harry's name into the goblet under a 4th school designation. They did not know Lord Voldemort was already manipulating events from the shadows. But the old pattern had begun reappearing. Once again, a tournament designed to demonstrate control was slipping beyond the control of its organizers. And as autumn deepened into winter, the champions prepared for the first task. Dragons were brought secretly to Hogwarts under the supervision of Charlie Weasley and experienced handlers from Romania. The audience anticipated excitement. The organizers anticipated a demonstration of courage. Hidden behind both expectations was a darker reality. The tournament's bloodiest chapter was already underway, and almost nobody recognized it yet. Was Cedric Diggory's death simply another tournament tragedy, or proof that the old curse of the Triwizard tournament had never truly disappeared? The first task took place on November 24th, 1994, and from the moment Harry Potter saw the dragons waiting inside their enclosures, the reality of the tournament became impossible to ignore. Charlie Weasley had secretly helped transport 4 nesting mothers to Hogwarts. The Hungarian horntail paced restlessly behind chains and barriers. The Chinese fireball sent smoke curling from its nostrils. The Swedish short snout and common Welsh green waited nearby under the watchful eyes of dragon handlers. These were not illusions created for entertainment. They were living creatures capable of killing human beings within seconds. The revival's promises of safety suddenly felt much less reassuring. Harry entered the arena last. By then he had learned, thanks to Hagrid and the covert assistance of Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Alastor Moody, that his greatest advantage would be flight. Summoning his firebolt with Accio, he rose into the air as the Hungarian horntail broke partially free of its restraints. The dragon pursued him above the Hogwarts grounds, breathing fire and slashing with its spiked tail. Students watching from the stands witnessed something far more dangerous than a school competition. They were watching a 14-year-old boy outrun one of the deadliest creatures in the wizarding world. The crowd erupted when he captured the golden egg, but the task also exposed a troubling truth. The margin between success and catastrophe remained frighteningly small. Cedric Diggory approached the challenge differently. He transfigured a rock into a dog, attempting to distract his dragon long enough to seize the egg. Fleur Delacour employed a sleeping charm. Victor Krum attacked his dragon's eyes with the conjunctivitis curse. Each champion revealed intelligence and creativity. Yet each task also produced consequences. Cedric suffered burns. Fleur nearly lost control of the situation when her dragon awakened unexpectedly. Krum's strategy caused collateral damage among the eggs. The tournament rewarded skill, but it also punished mistakes relentlessly. The months that followed brought no reduction in tension. On February 25th, 1995, the second task unfolded beneath the icy waters of the Black Lake. The champions faced an entirely different kind of danger. Instead of fire and open spectacle, they confronted darkness, cold, and uncertainty. Harry used gillyweed supplied by Dobby. Cedric transformed himself, partially through magic. Victor Krum employed a partial shark transfiguration. Fleur struggled after encountering Grindylows and failed to retrieve her hostage. The task demonstrated something important about the tournament. Danger did not always roar like a dragon. Sometimes it waited silently beneath the surface. The hostages themselves created an unsettling image. Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, Cho Chang, and Gabrielle Delacour rested deep underwater under magical enchantment. Dumbledore assured everyone that they were perfectly safe, yet Harry remained unconvinced. When he reached the hostages, he lingered to ensure nobody would be abandoned. His decision cost him valuable time, but revealed his character. The judges awarded extra points for moral courage. In retrospect, the moment feels significant. The tournament consistently claimed to reward bravery, yet Harry's finest act came not from defeating an opponent, but from refusing to leave others behind. Why did the final task prove so much more dangerous than anyone expected? The answer begins with the maze. By June 1995, hedges more than 20 feet high had transformed part of the Hogwarts grounds into a living labyrinth. The organizers filled it with magical obstacles. Blast-ended scroots, bred by Rubius Hagrid, lurked within. Boggarts appeared in unexpected forms. Enchanted mist disoriented competitors. The maze was designed to test judgment as much as magical power. Unlike the Dragon Arena or the Black Lake, spectators could not observe what was happening inside. For the first time, the champions entered a challenge largely hidden from public view. That isolation proved crucial. Outside the maze, judges believed they remained in control. Inside, Barty Crouch Jr. continued manipulating events. Throughout the school year, he had quietly guided Harry toward success. He ensured Harry learned about dragons. He subtly encouraged solutions. He eliminated obstacles that might threaten the plan. Every intervention moved Harry closer to the center of the maze. The tournament was no longer merely a competition. It had become a carefully engineered trap. The influence of the Imperious Curse appears repeatedly during these final stages. Victor Krum, normally disciplined and honorable, fell under magical control. He attacked Cedric Diggory and attempted to sabotage other competitors. The transformation shocked those who later learned what had happened. Krum was not acting according to his own will. Someone else had taken command of his actions. The maze concealed this corruption perfectly. Observers outside remained unaware that the integrity of the competition had already collapsed. As Harry moved deeper into the labyrinth, he encountered obstacles that highlighted his growth. He defeated a boggart disguised as a Dementor. He navigated magical hazards that would have overwhelmed many adult wizards. Eventually, he reached the Triwizard Cup almost simultaneously with Cedric Diggory. The scene that followed remains one of the most revealing moments in Cedric's story. Neither champion attempted to seize victory selfishly. Cedric argued that Harry deserved the win because he had rescued him earlier. Harry insisted Cedric should claim it because of his superior performance throughout the tournament. Their conversation reflected genuine decency on both sides. Then they made a choice that changed wizarding history. Together, Harry and Cedric grasped the Triwizard Cup. What neither of them knew was that the cup had been transformed into a portkey. In an instant, the maze vanished. The cheers of Hogwarts disappeared. The champions were transported to a graveyard in Little Hangleton, a village connected deeply to the history of the Riddle family. Moonlight illuminated weathered tombstones. Silence replaced celebration. For a brief moment, neither boy understood where they had arrived. The answer came almost immediately. A small figure carrying a bundle emerged from the darkness. The figure was Peter Pettigrew, once one of James Potter's closest friends, and now a servant of Lord Voldemort. The bundle in his arms contained the weakened Dark Lord himself. Pettigrew looked toward Cedric and Harry and received a simple command. 4 words. Nothing elaborate, nothing dramatic. Kill the spare. The curse struck Cedric Diggory instantly. Green light flashed across the graveyard. Cedric fell without understanding why he had been targeted. He had survived dragons. He had survived the Black Lake. He had survived the maze, the tournament's most capable Hogwarts champion in decades. Died not because he failed a task, but because he happened to stand beside Harry Potter at the wrong moment. The brutality of the event shattered every assumption about the competition. This was no longer a tragic accident. This was murder. And as Cedric's body lay beside the grave of Tom Riddle Sr., the Triwizard Tournament crossed a line from which it could never truly recover. The bloodiest years of its history had always been associated with dangerous creatures and reckless challenges. Now something even darker had entered the story. The tournament had become the gateway through which Lord Voldemort returned to power. Did the Triwizard Tournament fail because it was too dangerous, or because it revealed something uncomfortable about the wizarding world's fascination with glory, risk, and spectacle? Cedric Diggory's body returned to Hogwarts beneath a summer sky that only moments earlier had witnessed celebration. The contrast remains one of the most devastating images in the entire Harry Potter series. Spectators had gathered expecting to applaud a champion. Parents and students waited for the conclusion of a famous competition. Instead, Harry Potter emerged, clutching Cedric's corpse and screaming for help. Amos Diggory's cries echoed across the grounds. The joy vanished instantly. For many present, it was the first undeniable sign that something terrible had happened beyond the maze. The tragedy shattered the illusion that the revived tournament had escaped the mistakes of its predecessors. Organizers had introduced age restrictions. They had consulted experts. They had involved the Ministry of Magic. Yet a champion still died. From a purely statistical perspective, the death toll of the revived tournament was lower than that of the Bloodiest centuries before it. Only one champion was killed, but emotionally the impact was enormous because this death unfolded before a generation that believed such things belonged to the past. Cedric's murder transformed historical warnings into present reality. The immediate aftermath exposed deep fractures within the wizarding world. Harry told Dumbledore exactly what had occurred in the graveyard. He described Peter Pettigrew. He described the ritual involving the bones of Tom Riddle Sr., the flesh of Pettigrew, and Harry's own blood. Most importantly, he described the return of Lord Voldemort. Dumbledore listened and believed him. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, chose a different path. Faced with a terrifying truth, he preferred denial. That response carries an unexpected connection to the history of the Triwizard Tournament itself. Throughout the competition's long existence, dangerous realities had repeatedly been minimized or rationalized. Fatalities accumulated before the tournament was canceled. The 1792 disaster injured all 3 school heads, yet the event continued. Warning signs appeared over centuries, and people repeatedly convinced themselves that conditions remained manageable. Fudge behaved similarly. He saw evidence of Voldemort's return and decided it was easier to reject it than confront its implications. The pattern was familiar. Human beings, magical or otherwise, often resist truths that threaten cherished assumptions. Why did Cedric's death resonate so deeply compared with earlier casualties? Partly because readers and characters knew him. Historical champions existed as distant figures. Cedric existed as a person. We watched him compete. We saw his fairness after the Quidditch match, disrupted by Dementors in Harry's 3rd year. We watched him share information about the golden egg clue. We watched him insist that Harry deserved equal credit. Cedric was not reckless, cruel, or arrogant. He embodied many of the qualities the tournament claimed to reward. His death therefore felt profoundly unjust. The competition had taken exactly the kind of champion it was supposed to celebrate. His death also stripped away romantic illusions surrounding danger. Earlier generations could imagine the tournament's casualties as heroic figures from distant centuries. Cedric made the cost immediate. Students at Hogwarts attended classes with him. They ate meals beside him. Members of Hufflepuff House knew him personally. When the tournament's dangers became attached to a recognizable face, abstraction disappeared. The old stories no longer felt adventurous. They felt tragic. The irony is that Cedric himself did almost everything right. He prepared carefully. He treated competitors respectfully. He demonstrated courage without recklessness. He adapted successfully to every challenge. By ordinary standards, he should have survived. His death reminds us that the greatest threat in the 1994 to 1995 tournament was never the dragon, the mer people, or the maze. It was the hidden manipulation surrounding the event. Voldemort had transformed the tournament into a weapon long before the champions realized they were being used. There is another layer worth considering. The Triwizard tournament was originally created to promote friendship between schools. In one sense, it succeeded. Harry developed respect for Cedric. He formed a complicated but genuine understanding with Victor Krum. Fleur Delacour later maintained connections with the Weasley family and eventually married Bill Weasley. Relationships emerged that likely would never have existed without the competition. The tournament achieved its stated purpose in ways both large and small, yet those successes are inseparable from the dangers that accompanied them. A popular fan theory argues that Cedric's death permanently poisoned any possibility of future tournaments. Official canon never states whether another Triwizard tournament will eventually occur. The books leave the question unanswered, but the theory feels persuasive. Every future organizer would have to contend not only with centuries of fatalities, but also with the most famous champion death in modern wizarding history. The image of Harry returning with Cedric's body would haunt any discussion of revival. Some memories become too powerful to overcome. Why does the story of the tournament continue attracting attention long after its conclusion? Because it sits at the intersection of two enduring themes in Rowling's world. The first is courage. Again and again, Harry Potter celebrates bravery. Characters face dragons, dementors, Death Eaters, and impossible choices. The second theme is the danger of confusing courage with the pursuit of glory. James Potter matured beyond youthful arrogance. Sirius Black paid dearly for reckless decisions. Even Dumbledore spent his later life reflecting on youthful ambitions shared with Gellert Grindelwald. The Triwizard Tournament embodies both impulses simultaneously. It rewards courage while tempting participants with fame. Viewed through that lens, the tournament becomes more than a competition. It becomes a mirror. The dragons, the maze, and the Black Lake reveal character under pressure. Harry's decision to save Gabrielle Delacour, despite losing time, reveals character. Cedric's willingness to share victory reveals character. Even Fleur's fierce loyalty to her sister reveals character. The tasks matter less than the responses they inspire. What survives after the tournament ends is not the score. It is the choices people made. As the years passed, Hogwarts continued standing above the Black Lake. Students still crossed the grounds beneath starlight. The Durmstrang ship departed. The Beauxbaton carriage vanished into the distance. The maze was dismantled. Life moved forward, as it always does, yet somewhere within the castle's long memory the echoes remained. The cheers of spectators, the roar of dragons, the splash of dark water beneath winter skies, the sudden silence of a graveyard, far from home. And if you return in your mind to that opening image, the wind moving across the black lake, torchlight flickering against ancient stone, you can almost understand why the tournament endured for so many centuries. It offered wonder, it offered prestige, it offered stories that lasted generations. But drifting beneath those reflections, hidden like something deep beneath the lake's dark surface, was another truth. Every champion who stepped forward entered a tradition that demanded a price, and the wizarding world spent centuries learning that some prices are far higher than they first appear. What makes the Triwizard tournament so memorable is not the dragons, the maze, or even the tragedies. It is the way those things reveal a deeper truth about the wizarding world. Again and again throughout Rowling's story, power is never judged solely by what a person can do. It is judged by why they do it. The magical world is filled with extraordinary abilities. Wizards can fly, transform objects, summon fire, erase memories, and bend the laws of nature in ways muggles could scarcely imagine. Yet the greatest moments in the series rarely belong to the most powerful spells. They belong to choices. The tournament follows that same pattern from beginning to end. The organizers believed they were testing courage. In a sense, they were right. Harry faced a Hungarian horntail because he was brave. Cedric entered the maze because he was brave. Fleur descended into the Black Lake because she was brave. But courage alone was never the lesson. The deeper lesson appears in the moments when victory becomes less important than another person. Harry loses valuable time because he refuses to abandon Gabrielle Delacour. Cedric insists on sharing the triumph at the center of the maze. Even long before the final tragedy, the story quietly suggests that the champions are at their best when they stop thinking like competitors and start thinking like human beings. The tournament rewards skill, but Rowling's world rewards character. There's also something haunting about the forgotten champions who vanished into history. Their names are gone, their victories are gone. Many details of their lives have disappeared completely. Yet their stories still matter because they form part of a larger pattern running through the entire series. Hogwarts itself is full of ghosts, portraits, memories, and echoes. The past is never truly absent. It lingers in stone corridors and magical objects, in old songs, and in warnings that later generations sometimes ignore. The Triwizard tournament feels ancient because it carries the weight of all those invisible lives. Every champion who stepped forward became part of a chain stretching across centuries. Perhaps that is why Cedric Diggory's death feels so important within the larger mythology. It is not merely the loss of a talented student. It is the moment when history stops feeling distant. For generations, the tournament's dangers belong to old stories. Then suddenly the cost becomes personal. A face replaces a statistic. A voice replaces a legend. The magical world can no longer hide behind nostalgia because the consequences stand directly in front of it. In many ways, Cedric's death marks the end of innocence not only for Harry Potter, but for the tournament itself. And beneath all of this lies one of Rowling's most enduring ideas. institutions are not automatically wise simply because they are old. Hogwarts contains great wisdom, but it also contains hidden chambers, dangerous secrets, and mistakes made by previous generations. The Ministry of Magic protects society, yet often falls prey to fear and denial. The Triwizard Tournament was created for noble reasons, but noble reasons did not protect people from harm. Traditions acquire authority over time. The challenge is learning when to honor them and when to question them. Throughout the series, characters who understand that distinction are often the ones who find the clearest path forward. So, as the story finally settles and the centuries grow quiet once more, you are left not with the roar of dragons or the cheers of crowds, but with something smaller. A breeze moves across the black lake. The windows of Hogwarts glow softly in the darkness. The maze is gone. The visitors have departed. The champions belong to memory now. Yet the water still reflects the torchlight just as it did hundreds of years before. And somewhere in those dark ripples rests the memory of every student who stepped forward, seeking glory, friendship, or simply the chance to prove who they were, while the ancient castle watched in silence from the shore.